What's going on, YouTube? What's up? So I gotta ask, what was the peak and the prime of the average white band? These cats from Scotland, they was funky, and they got their name for being white cats that could funk predominantly, and that was one of the things that made them distinctive. Cats had chops, had vocals. I want to say, if I'm honest, I want to say they prime and they peak had to be probably 74 to about 78, if I'm honest. Um, They were very much influenced by the James Brown horns and the bass in the pocket. When you hear "Cut the Cake," they weren't what we call the most imaginative lyricists, except on slow cuts. Because "The Love of Our Own" was my jam. Um, you know, "Queen of My Soul." I like when they did the slow cuts. That's one, but their funk stuff was pretty simplistic. It was pretty tongue in cheek. You didn't really have to be no deep scholar. It was pretty Jerry Springerish as far as the deep thought, as far as like cut the cake, pick up the pieces. But it was more instrumental call and response. It was very much inspired by JB's funk, Fred Wesley and uh Maceo Parker, and when they do like chants and call and response, that's what they did. That's where they really thrive, you know. Uh kind of thing that you hear that was rampant, and it was definitely something that you could groove to. So I think that's one of the things that made them work, because they had this call and response. Like the bass would rock with the drums and the groove, and and they had the pocket guitar. They had the grooves that you just, it was done in a syncopation that was pretty simplified, but it worked. It worked. It was one of those things that you couldn't shake. It was, and it was like steeped in old school type styling, but it worked really well. So when you hear the songs and the grooves, that was their trademark. They sounded like a modernized version of what James Brown would if he had a came out in the '70s with that styling, but on that aesthetic. But it was very effective with what they were. And so when you hear their music, you know it. And they had a great run though. I mean, they one of my favorite funk bands that I definitely dug. I put them in my probably somewhere in my top 20 funk bands that I dug, cuz I like the groove, I like the harmonies and everything. They was tight. AWB was tight, you know. Um they could play. I like their flow. I like their vibe, you know. Um One of those things is like, for certain things with me, I have tiers to different things, and so I probably say like a high second tier, very high second tier with them. But I like their grooves. They were catchy, and they could definitely, you know, I like the tone of them, and I like what they did. So when you listen to the average white band, and they've been sampled galore. Schoolboy Crush is the one that's been sampled galore. That heavy percussion and that bass and them drums and that vocals, that was the cut. When you wait a minute and you hear the bells, whistles, they had a distinctive flair that they did. So you knew it was them. And one of those bands that doesn't get its due, because I believe it's because they did the funk and they weren't generic with it. So that's why you had to put some respect by the name. But anyway, let me know where you came down on their peak and prime, if you were a fan of Average White Band, and what you think. Please like, subscribe, welcome thoughts, comments, and I do respond. Thank you. Wash your hands, keep your mind clear. Watch out for another, and do share this video if you like. And also, like when I talk about this band, also consider their slow cuts, because they had some bumping slow cuts. Them vocals was on point. So AWB was for real. And they did work with Benny King too, if you remember. They got down in the late '70s. All right, I'm out. Peace.